Yesterday we began talking about the vital body in general, and we noted that there was no astrology that related to the vital body, so what we're having to do is improvise astrology to understand how the vital body functions and how the four ethers are related astrologically. And today we're going to talk about the chemical ether, and we'll look a little bit at how the chemical ether works in the cosmos, but mostly we'll look at how it is in the vital body. The chemical ether is almost exclusively occupied with form, with matter, and with the mineral kingdom. It's responsible for holding together all of the compounds that we see around us, and even those that we don't see, like carbon dioxide and things like that. It's also responsible for the formation and the decomposition and the transformation of different chemical interactions. In fact, some people claim, the anthroposophists, for example, claim that there is an active alchemy going on through the chemical ether in plant bodies, in that they bring something from one mineral state to another through the agency of the plant. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches that the chemical ether, like all of the other ethers, is polar, bipolar, a positive pole and a negative pole. And in this, there is agreement with physical science that it is opposite poles that hold the compounds together. And polar attraction is responsible for how interactions occur. Energy, which in chemistry is called adding heat or removing heat, is that is an excitement of the flux passing through the chemical ether and causing the transformations, or bringing about the transformations. Now, a lot can be said about the chemical ether by studying chemistry, both organic and inorganic chemistry. You get to understand the character of how from one simple ether various different formations in atomic structure take on various kinds of character. And like all other character in the cosmos, that character is astrological. We say that one element or one compound has a Martial nature, and another one has a Jupiterian nature, and things like that. And it actually works out with how those things work into the world around us. We say some plants are iron rich, and we say other plants, by the way, spinach is not as iron rich as they used to think. It happened that when they did the original tests for testing for minerals in various vegetables, they got the decimal point wrong in spinach. And for years the whole world lived on the notion that spinach had way more iron than it actually did. And when it was corrected, it's in line with all of the other plants, and it isn't profoundly different. So Popeye was an illusion. All right. Boy, I should have cleaned my glasses. It's been a half a year now. They're about ready. The chemists do a very good job. Even though they're not clairvoyant, they're in the same boat as all the rest of us, but not being clairvoyant, they have a very good understanding, extremely sensitive understanding of the nature of elements and of the nature of interactions and what you can and can't do with them. It is a splendid thing that being in the blind, that we do with understanding the inner side of nature. How much better it would be if we had the spiritual vision and could do things much more directly. But it's one of those things we don't have to be profound in all of these things. We can use these things and understand them without clairvoyance. For example, we drive a car. All of us drive cars, but not all of us can engineer a car, and not all of us can repair a car because we don't understand. But the degree of understanding of using something so that we can use chemistry and other things doesn't always have to be at the greatest level of depth. Now, from a very simple observation of the world around us, we can infer that what the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches about the chemical ether in relation to compounds is true. And that is, like everything else, Earl was talking in his talk yesterday about all magic being done through blood, and that means various different things. For example, in St. John's Gospel, the body and blood of Christ represent two states of form and flux in the life spirit. Similarly, every world has form and flux, and there is a flow of energy through the chemical ether, just like there is in everything else. So that if we are using electricity, all of the atoms aren't moving, but there is the flow of energy along the atoms in a wire, for example. Now, the application of energy, as we mentioned just a moment ago, in the form of heat or electricity or something like that, creates and in some cases even transforms mineral elements. When we look at the vital bodies of living creatures, such as plants, animals, and humans, we can see that the forms that are produced in the mineral kingdom that are of living things are very different than the minerals themselves. That is, we have been able to appropriate the minerals and use them in a living way. And this is done through the etheric vital body. And the chemical ether of the vital body is what is most responsible for the change of form. Oh boy, I'm exhausted. On top of that, my water heater's going out, and I'm going to have to take ice cold showers by the end of the week. The ability to utilize the mineral kingdom through the vital body, we can see in a very simple way. That is, in the difference between organic and inorganic chemistry. Because there is a vital body involved with organic chemistry, the reactions take place much more slowly. It isn't just a quick transfer of energy. You're dealing on a more macro level. You're dealing on the level of molecules and in some cases cells, and it takes a longer time in order to bring these things about. Now, it is through the etheric vital body that we bring life to the physical body. In the next talk of this series, we're going to talk about the life ether, and we're going to talk about the vitalization itself. But for now, we're going to talk only about the chemical ether, and we'll try to focus mostly on the chemical ether in the human vital body. Now, when we do this, this is going to be so fast and so shallow that it has nothing of comprehensiveness to it at all. And I'm just introducing these things because I think they are things that should be studied and would be very much to the benefit of humanity and to our own spiritual development. So we're going to go through a number of things, and I'm just going to mention little tidbits and hope that it takes, and that so that people will want to work on them, right? You know, I can't go into detail because I can't do that much anymore. It's a long time in life. There is so much that is in spiritual philosophy that you start looking into things and you find that there are worlds within worlds within worlds, and you start studying something and it gets bigger and bigger, and there are many things like this that are untouched. I think that you're never ever going to exhaust the study of spiritual philosophy because there is so much there to be studied. So this is meant to be an astrology talk, so we'll bring a little bit of astrology into this, and we're going to bring a little bit of understanding, I hope, of the evolutionary creation, the great work that we are participating in, bring a little bit of understanding to that. In the mineral kingdom itself, there is an evolution. And that evolution is a microcosmic image of the grand, large-scale evolution. Just as our lives are based on the evolutionary pattern, so is the life within the mineral kingdom, and the way the life wave, the consciousness of becoming beings in the mineral kingdom, is brought through various stages to come to awakeness. Now, a very simple example of this is that the cosmological pattern that we find of periods and globes and revolutions and things like that is found in the table of elements, the periodic table. The whole scheme of evolution is there. That, for example, if you go horizontally across the periodic table, you can find the 7 different stages of evolution. Vertically, going through the periodic table, you find the stages of evolution in a different way. And it's something like there are cycles within cycles, and in chemistry there is then a very pretty miniature of the greater cosmos. So we can see that a Mars period or a Saturn period or something of that nature is replicated in various ways on the periodic table. If you take, for example, looking in the standard table of elements, if you look at that table, to the left are the minerals, and to the right are the anions, the non-minerals. And if you take Mars in a mineral state, you have iron. But if you take Mars in a non-mineral state, you have sulfur. And they each bring out a different side of the character of Mars. And to understand the character of Mars, you can study in nature how sulfur or how iron works. Like, for example, iron has, ruled by Mars, as its planetary opposite, it has Venus. And in the blood, the interactions between copper and copper and iron are very important for our health. And you can see the balance going back and forth between the two of them by looking at blood chemistry, which we're not going to go into. This is way beyond what we're trying to do here. Metallic, mercury in the metallic end of the chart is quicksilver, which we call mercury itself. It is phosphorus in the non-metallic side. So if we look at the nature of phosphorus in neural as well as energy changes on the cellular level, we have a good understanding of that, especially the phosphates in the body. And when you get down to the metabolic level of the Krebs cycle and things like that, the phosphate compounds, because of the big valency, I think it's O5, isn't it? Yeah. That it's capable of carrying and holding a lot of energy. But it's Mercury is a planet that is a messenger that passes between the gods, and it's involved in a lot of catalytic activity. And so the phosphates in cellular activity have that same mercurial character. They're capable of talking to this in this way and this in another way by using the different levels of valency. If we look at Saturn in the metallic end of the chart, we have lead. And then we have the quasi-metallic Saturn that is in calcium. The history, everything in history is from the geological level to the age of the cell itself is determined by calcium. We'll get to that in just a little bit. Biochemistry and ionic activity of all of these elements there's an evolution going on. The great poet mystic Goethe talked about the wars that took place between atoms, and apparently with clairvoyance he could see the kinds of evolutionary interactions that there were between various different chemical reagents. We're still trying to get our way to the human vital body and the place of the chemical ether in that, so we'll have to move a little closer. In general, in the human vital body, in fact, in all living things that have a vital body, there are 4 elements that are most commonly used. They're called the hydrocarbons. They are hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon. Traditionally, the fiery hydrogen, which is the basic, simple basis of everything, we're being Heraclitean here and saying that everything comes out of fire, hydrogen is ruled by the element of fire. And in the zodiac, the fixed sign with the beasts of Ezekiel, or the gospel signs are the signs of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. And so being fiery, hydrogen relates to Leo. When you add oxygen, the air element that is associated with Aquarius, you have light. You have an illumined fire. And so these are the basis of the simplest kinds of interactions. With that fire, there is a condensation. Hydrogen and oxygen come together and they produce water. And water is associated with Scorpio, and Scorpio is ruled by Mars. And that is where we have, organically speaking, the wet fire. In the nitrogen compounds, which are associated with proteins, for example, and proteins are where the muscles are, and the muscles are all ruled by desire and those Mars qualities. So we find then that out of the nitrogenous water is where things go into decomposition and they're brought back to the earthy state. And the earthy state is ruled by Taurus. It's bedrock in the hydrocarbons, and it is bedrock in growth or organic development within human beings. So these are things, by understanding the basic interactions, which is these 4 elements are the basis of all organic chemistry, by understanding them and how they interact with each other in different ways and bring in other elements, is a good way of understanding not only the cosmos around us, but seeing spiritual intent being played out in a physical form in a way that is comprehensible. All right. I'm way away from the notes here. We said just a moment ago that calcium is the indicator of history. Saturn is the indicator of history. If you look at the body of a baby, and you look at the body of somebody in middle age, and you look at the body of someone old, the big difference is hardness. The baby, even the bones are pliable in a baby. And as you get older, there's more and more calcium in you, and you become more brittle. You look at the skin on the hands, and you see that in an older person that they're hard and crackly and things like that. So what we're talking about is the amount of calcium that is in the body indicates the age. Now, if you look at an infant, the infant is soft and it grows in little spurts, and around age 7, the matrix of the physical body to be begins to become incorporated into the physical, or the physical gets built into the matrix of the etheric body. And so there is rapid growth, and even the proportions of the body change, so that in reaching adulthood, the body grows very fast. It has a certain shape and a certain proportion to it. I think the skull, I think it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The skull doubles, the thorax triples, the arms quadruple, and the legs quintuple between from birth until adulthood. So at puberty, when the desire body comes in, the growth of the vital body is curbed. And this is because the energy that is normally put into growth is being put into the capability for reproduction, and it's being put into satisfying the desires that we have. So, if we look at someone, we see that the physical body is very different at very different ages. And it's all due to Saturn, it's all due to calcium. So by looking at Saturn in the horoscope, you can tell the degree of psychological, of spiritual, and of physical aging. In fact, on astrologers, the life is divided into 3/3 between the 3 Saturn cycles, which take place between 29 and 30, and then between 58 and 60, and then the latter part of life being the 3rd. This is going all very fast. Not a very good talk, but I just want to cover a lot of things and hope that some of them spur new interest in you. Now, in all of this, we know that the physiological process is changed by what we do, especially what we take in and give out from our bodies. If we don't eat, our body dies. If we eat too much, we're prone to all kinds of illnesses. And these things are controlled enlarged by our consciousness, having certain attitudes. Again, these attitudes are astrologically designated. Having these attitudes controls what our metabolism is going to be and how things function in us. We can augment this process by using herbs or things of that nature, but basically it's our attitude. Now let's look a little bit at attitude that is astrologically designated and how attitude affects things, especially in the chemical ether of the physical body. Now, we just said just a moment ago that the physical body gets built into an etheric matrix in the vital body. And that building process doesn't really end with adulthood, even though it becomes slowed down by puberty and comes to a seeming end somewhere in the early 20s. It doesn't end. The etheric matrix is flexible. It's changeable. And so we can stretch it, we can squeeze it in, and this is what happens if we gain weight or if we become older and we shrink. There are changes in the etheric body that go along with that. Now, the whole process of living in the physical, etheric, combined bodies, the dynamic living process is called metabolism. Metabolism is broken into two parts. When we take on new material, either to grow or to replenish what we have in us, this is called anabolism. And anabolism, it has to do with the positive pole of the chemical ether. We attract exactly what we need, and that is on the very most microcosmic level and every level up from that. For example, the little villi in the intestines are so sensitive that they attract exactly the elements that the body needs and carries them into the bloodstream where they can be brought to use where they are needed. At the negative pole of the chemical ether, we have catabolism. It's what is most active when we are asleep. When we are asleep at the negative pole of the chemical ether, we're cleansing and getting rid of all the things that we didn't have time to get rid of during the day because we were expending our energies in the activity of the day. The biochemistry of our body at night when we are asleep is very different than it is during the daytime. Now, different people, again, according to their character, have different metabolic rates, and they have different efficiencies, they have different tastes, so to speak, in the way their metabolism works. We all know those types of people that have a high metabolic rate. They live fast, they burn energy fast, they're highly muscular people, often very athletic, they're almost never fat, and they have a high ratio of muscle to fat. And this is, roughly speaking, but you have to be very careful of not having unrealistic generalizations. These are people that we say have a martial metabolism. Other people like to eat slowly. They like to appreciate their food. They don't like to overdo it. They are temperate in all things, and they are smooth and easy about life. They're rounder people, but they aren't necessarily heavy. And we say that such people have a Venusian metabolism. Then we know of people who are always anxious, always mildly fearful or nervous, and they're usually gaunt. And it's not because they have a fast metabolism that's burning things up, but it's because they have an edgy metabolism. And the character of the individual fits right into the metabolic activity through the positive and negative pole of the chemical ether. We would say of such a person that such a person has a Saturnian and or a mercurial metabolism. It's a wonderful thing to be able to understand metabolism and understand how it works together with character. Unfortunately, there are big problems with doing something like this because you read biographies of people, they don't say anything about their biological functioning. Never do you read a biography of someone and find out what their metabolism is like. That's just not done. It's unfortunate that it is that way, because we could learn a lot. Even if we had medical records, we could learn a lot, because in medical records, that's always kept confidential. So the opportunity to study the spiritual side of metabolism and what attitude and character does to affect the metabolism and how we function in the world, unless we are clairvoyant or unless we are extremely intuitive with our observation, that kind of information or that kind of knowledge we are slow to come to it. Some people have an attitude where they go whole hog into things. They're indulgent and they love the foods with the rich flavors, the butter and the things like that, that if they aren't flavorful in themselves, they carry other flavors with them. And a lot of people of this nature become heavy set. They're relaxed. It's not that they're incapable of doing things, but they prefer this kind of indulgence. And we say of such a person who's relaxed, it happens to all of us as we go on in life, we become more secure. And when we become more secure, we become more relaxed and we become more Jupiterian. And we all develop Jupiterian metabolisms. In our society, it's almost a religion to indulge in rich foods, and if not rich foods, we treat ourselves with sweet, sugary things, and when we do that, we produce a kind of metabolism that all of us are getting generally fat. We have to follow. This is my friend Clifford, who I haven't seen in about 45 years, and I remember something he said 45 years ago, and I try to do it all the time. He says, you drink what you eat, and you eat what you drink. Meaning to say that when you take food in, you chew it until you drink, and when you take liquid in, you oxidize it before you swallow it. It's really good. That stuck with me all of these years. So these are a few very simple things about the chemistry that works through the positive and negative pole of the chemical ether. And these are things that are almost untouched in science or spiritual science. Some people do a little bit with it, but not a lot. And there's a lot that could be gotten from it. And when we don't know things, as long as they're harmonious, we continue to not know them. If we think about our body, when our bodies are balanced and they're given what they need, we don't even know them. We don't know we have teeth until we have a toothache. Or we don't know that we have a liver problem until we start getting pains in the liver. So our ignorance, our blissful ignorance that we have when things are functioning smoothly, that ignorance is broken and brought to light when things don't function. And in many ways we would never understand our faults if those faults didn't come to painful illnesses. We're supposed to look for the good in everything, And by looking for the good in illness, we can see that in illness, we learn where we went wrong. It's like what Max Heindel has to say about nerves. He said if we didn't have nerves that sense pain, we could lay our hand on a stove and burn it off up to the elbow without even knowing it. And so when we have pain, or when we have the absence of harmony, we begin to understand what we were blissfully ignorant of before. Now, this is, since there is no astrology for the ethers, and since we're trying to work our way into that, we're trying to improvise in astrology, we're going to try and follow this reasoning of when something malfunctions, that gives us an insight into function or into what is really going on. And with regard to the chemical ether component of the human vital body, the Rosicrucian philosophy has something in it that gives us an insight of this nature into the functioning of the chemical ether. Now, the physical body, you can't separate the solids, liquids, and gases from it, because if you do, that's an unnatural state. But the vital body is different. Since the vital body is held together, sort of knitted together, and it isn't friction that holds the knitting together, it is polarity. This is why you can have things like etheric healing, or why organs can be changed by changing the shape of things with etheric manipulations. Some people even wake up at night if the invisible helpers are working on them and they see hands that are doing manipulative work. Now, this means, we can't separate the solids, liquids, and gases. We do it to some extent in the breathing. We take gas in and leave it off. But in the vital body, you can separate the ethers from each other. And sometimes that's desirable, and sometimes that is undesirable. And in doing that, you produce a special state. We're going to be talking a lot tomorrow night, especially when we're talking about the separation of the higher ethers from the lower ethers to be able to make soul trips. But in general, the ethers can be separated any which way. For example, if you separate the reflecting ether from all of the three lower ethers, you can function to some extent in the inner worlds. You can think away from your body, and you can remember. You don't have perception, but you have memories of impressions. The reflecting ether is associated with the impressions that are in the desire body. This is not a desirable state, because what you have left behind is a threefold solids, liquids, and gases, and three ethers. And there's something detached about that. This doesn't happen very often, but if you have someone who is exceedingly mental, so that they want to rise above physical activity and they want to be aloof in their consciousness, this kind of separation literally takes place in the vital body. And so there is a great danger in being an ivory tower kind of person, because you are removed. Now, the way we try to do it in esoteric training, by doing various spiritual exercises, we try to separate the two higher ethers, which are the soul ethers, which are the light ether being associated with sense perception, and those kinds of activities, and the reflecting ether being associated with memory and thought. Each of these two higher ethers is associated with the higher vehicles, and then you can leave the physical body behind to do its biological thing. This is what we'll be talking about in the evening talks quite a bit. That's the healthy way of doing it. But sometimes we produce one of those conditions where the three higher ethers are separated from the chemical ether. And when that happens, it's a very unhealthy state. When that happens, we get to see the chemical ether as it functions in its purest way. It's one of those cases, it's like having the sore tooth. You know you have that tooth is there because it isn't functioning right. And when you have someone that has the chemical ether separated from the higher ethers, it changes the physical body. It produces a kind of psychophysical hardness in the body. And that's what we want to get to, because that's we're finally getting close to doing some astrology. There are two ways that this separation takes place. One is when people try to take spiritual things, produce spiritual states through physical activities, mechanical activities. You can't breathe yourself into heaven. And there are some people who, by certain kinds of propelled breathing or certain kinds of repetitive breathings that is in a mechanical way, that you can put yourself into a state that you can bring your consciousness out of your body. But the fact is you're doing something very materialistic. You're saying that something physical, the breath activity, is producing something spiritual. And the only way you can do something spiritual is to live spiritually, to live in the spirit, and something physical and mechanical can't do that. And so when you try to breathe yourself into heaven, you sometimes produce the condition where the chemical ether is separated from the higher ethers. The other way that it comes about is when a person gives up all hope, and they begin to believe that matter is all there is. Sometimes it happens when people have too much of matter, but usually it happens when people have too little of matter, and they would like to have more, and they dream of having more. The result is an illness that in Max Heindel's time was called consumption. We call it tuberculosis. And what we're saying is that an extreme materialistic attitude is what produces tuberculosis. Now, people are going to jump up and down and say, but we know bacterium produces tuberculosis. Yes, it does, but that's not an initial cause. That is a terminal cause. It's way down the chain of causes. It's the last thing that happens. The findings of mysticism through clairvoyant observation, or just between intuitive observation with our senses, is that all physical conditions are a result of attitude. And having an extreme materialistic attitude sets up a condition for tuberculosis to take place. You have tuberculosis before you attract the germ or the bacterium that does the final work. I have a friend that is a toxologist in Ecuador, and I mentioned this to him, and he was delighted. He says, I had this view all of my life that this is what takes place, and he was delighted to hear this. So, what I did is I have this data bank with 20,000 horoscopes in it, and a very good search engine. And in order to understand the chemical ether, I took all the court cases out of there that had tuberculosis. And I looked at them and tried to find all of the things that were common between tubercular horoscopes. And we have only 2 horoscopes today. In the horoscopes of people who have tuberculosis, I have found 3 things that are common, or usually common. The first thing is a concentration of planets in earth signs. That is Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn. And traditionally, the chemical ether is associated with the earth element. It has that same kind of earthy morbidity about it, or melancholy way about it, and so they're all tied together. Anybody who's studied much astrology at all knows that earth sign people are extremely fuddy, and they're sensate people. They trust the senses. For example, often Taurus people have a hard time studying mysticism because it doesn't appeal to the senses. I don't want to make broad generalizations, but if we look at this horoscope, the horoscope of Karl Marx, we see the same thing. We see Jupiter is in Capricorn, Sun and Moon and Mercury are in Taurus, and that's 4 planets in earth signs, when on the average you would expect there to be 2 or 2.5 planets. So this is almost double of what you would expect, and so we can see that the earth influence is quite strong. The Sun and Moon are in Taurus, so there is and they're in the 2nd house. And the 2nd house is evaluation. Like people who do a lot of estimation work or things like that often have focus in the 2nd house, a strong focus in the 2nd house. And this is someone who has a lot of earth values. We know that from his writings, that he was preoccupied with ownership and matter. You know, this, the problem with communism, as it came out from Karl Marx, is that it was all about the sharing of matter. It had nothing to do with altruism and the sharing of the spirit. It was downright material. And so, in this case, there's attraction to matter and a wanting to hang on to it, a grasping, holding kind of nature. Now, the second thing that I found common to most common to tubercular charts is a tendency to depression. In this case, Saturn is in the 1st house in Pisces, and Saturn-Neptune combinations almost always. Did you get a copy? Oh, okay, one more left here.
No. That is Pluto, Richard. Do you know that?
Well, Pluto's in there too. I haven't come to that yet.
Saturn, Neptune.
Yeah, but Neptune, it rules Pisces. Yeah. All right?
Yes.
So we have that combination that is depressive in nature. Oh, I found it here. I got another extra one. So, what we have is a highly depressive person. Plus we have Pluto. Pluto is another very dark planet, and it's also in the 1st house. So he has a pessimistic outlook. He's looking at the end of the world. He's looking at the end of society as it is now, basically, his dialectical materialism is a takeoff on Hegel's philosophy, only taking the spirituality out of Hegel and trying to extend it into world history. And on top of that, Pluto is square to Neptune. So what we have here is someone that is highly depressive.
So was his reading?
What?
I thought his reading was the same. Karl Marx doctrine, I thought that was pretty much depressing when I read it.
Yes, yes, yes.
And there's a karmic consequence here with the millions that were killed in China and Russia.
Yeah.
His philosophy.
Yeah.
And that is indicated somehow, right? From the Pluto?
Yes, yes. Plutonium, of the smallest amount of plutonium that you can think of, can kill millions of people. It's the most poisonous thing that we know in the world is plutonium. Not to say that Scorpio isn't a poisonous sign or anything like that. Depression means to push down. And to push down, when you're depressed, it means you need to be deeper. And in order to, this is the general, this is not a specific etiology of depression, it's a general one. There are specific causes of depression, but the general one is the need to be pushed down. Now, in the United States, I think 40% of our country is depressed, at least. And it's because we have a shallow, materialistic view of the world. And we're depressed because we can't go deep enough to get down and behind the materialistic values we have so that we can get to something that is more meaningful, something that is more satisfying. And we do the absolutely worst thing that we can for depression. We take pills. And the pills, the taking of medicine for depression is a continuation of the materialistic notion. Like, this matter is going to make me better. And all it does is mask the situation, and you're not satisfying the condition by going deeper to where you can reach a faith or where you can reach a kind of spiritual experience so that everything doesn't look terrible as it does to the earth signs. All right? The third thing, each of these is exceedingly milder. The earth sign concentration was the most common. The third thing is some kind of afflictive aspect between Saturn and Uranus. And in this case, it's a square. And since Uranus rules the pituitary body and that controls the endocrine system, somehow when Saturn and Uranus are involved, there is a limitation of control of the endocrine system so that a person cannot get the full spectrum or the full range of endocrines that are needed to come into have a healthy life in the physical body, so that we, the spirit, can feel at home in a healthy way in our physical body. Since Saturn, through the earthy signs, rules the chemical ether, we can see that the chemical ether is what suffers the most. Mystics like of the Rosicrucian Order and the Rosicrucian Fellowship claim that the endocrines are part of a different system. They're part of the etheric body. That the endocrine glands, for example, the ductless glands, are not affected by the nerves, with one exception. That is the pituitary body, but we can't go into that now. That's way too big. But they communicate with each other through the blood. And so the etheric body brings its control on the physical, and when that control is damped by the Saturnine effect and attitude that controls puts a limitation on the controlling agency of Uranus and the pituitary body, the adjustment to the physical body is not healthy, it's not good, and this results, this is saying that this attitude is what results in tuberculosis. All right. The second horoscope that we have, we're almost done here. This is the horoscope that made me a hated man in South America. Because the first time I talked in South America about this horoscope, I got all kinds of feedback from the Catholics, and none of it was very positive, saying, why do you always pick on the Catholics just because you're Freemasonic children of fire? Why do you pick on us Catholics? And stating the fact that I talk more about Catholic saints, about 5 times as much about the horoscope of Catholic saints as I do about things where there are difficulties, that didn't change the argument. So I guess there's a sensitivity to Catholic criticism. This is the horoscope of a canonized saint. This is Thérèse Lisieux. She's sometimes called the Little Flower. And she's famous throughout Catholicism because she wrote a biography of her life. And it is a sweet little biography. And a lot of people really love it because she writes in this really quaint little way. I almost couldn't believe my eyes when I read it. And I almost wanted to gag at one part of it because it was sick. It was psychologically sick. All right. We'll get to that, though. Here we again have 4 planets in Earth signs. She was not a materialist, really, but maybe she was. Her the thing that she's most noted for in Catholicism is that she was a reformer of the forms, that the forms had come out of style and were not treated properly. So within the various orders of nuns, she did things that changed the forms of way things were done. Taurus rules the 9th house, and you can see that this is a very formalistic approach toward things, very form-oriented. Now, in this horoscope, Venus, the strongest aspect in this horoscope is Venus square Neptune, which is a classic for fantasy. And she had, there's a psychological compensation. The preoccupation with material form had to have some relief. And the relief from the preoccupation came in the form of fantasy. And she has these lovely, delightful vignettes of how she sees the world, which are quite fanciful, but not objectively real. And it's like one excess on one end of the spectrum led to another excess at the other end of the spectrum. She could never get away, despite all those lovely little fairy tale-like views that she had of her life and of Catholicism. She could never get away from her materialism. And she became tubercular. And I was astounded when I read her autobiography. When she said the first time that I coughed blood, she was ecstatic at that. It was almost like a first communion to her, because this was proof that she was being martyred. It was not that she saw this as proof that my body is not healthy, and if you want to carry it further, it is my attitude that produced this unhealthy state in my body and my materialism or my preoccupation with form. She thought, wow, it's going to be wonderful. I'm going to die of consumption. And when I read it, I couldn't believe it. And then when I voiced that in a lecture in a Catholic country, the Lord, the boom. Yeah, they couldn't believe it. But these are very good examples of an occupation with form and matter and substance, and it shows what happens in the human vital body, in the chemical ether of the human vital body. When you put too much attention to that, it separates the physical body from nutrition or nourishment from the higher body. She could retreat into the higher bodies in fantasy, but she could not bring through the spiritual flow in a way that was healthy. All right, that gives us a little bit of understanding, a backdoor way to get at the the chemical ether, rather than.
Why was she canonized?
For her work as a reformer, and for I don't know what her miracles were. Do you know what her miracles were?
No, but it was her little way.
Yes.
That's,
just a little flower.
Things, and she was assigned to help and take care of the old nuns that were very grouchy and very difficult to please, and she cheerfully, took care of them. But if you could give another couple sentences of right at the end where you explain what happened, that went quicker than I could catch what you all said.
What happens is if we have too great of an occupation with matter as an end in itself, and with the forms that are produced in matter, rather than having a view that brings spirit all the way through to the body and then takes things from the body and takes them in all the way to spirit, so that there is what you might call a spiritual respiration of experience from the within out and from the without back in. She sort of got focused on the without. We have to do the things the right way. We have to have things very formal so that they can be carried out right. And with that kind of focus, that attitude, literally in her vital body, separated the chemical ether from the other ethers of the vital body. It did that sufficiently enough to produce the condition that we call tuberculosis.
Well, it's interesting because my mother had TB, and I had my grandmother that did, and I went to Lachute in May last year, and went to the home where she lived and the home where her burial is, and it was very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a fondness of her since I was a child, and I wasn't familiar with your story, but it's interesting to understand what went behind it.
Oh, question, did I hear you say that Venus was squared to...
Just sextile to Neptune.
Okay.
Sorry.
Venus sextile to
Neptune. That's where the fanciful things come in.
Saturn square Neptune.
Saturn square.
And the Mars opposition, obviously.
Yes. The Saturn square Neptune is the depression. That's why this was chosen for all of the Earth and for the depressiveness. There wasn't anything obvious with Uranus in this chart. All right, let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Yeah, everybody wants a copy of the book. Yeah.